So how do you feel when someone says the word, it's time for scales, or in fact all those words, it's time for scales? I hope that doesn't fill you with dread, that expression, that kind of demand, that thought. And I suppose it all goes back really to the way that scales were first introduced to us when we were back at the times when we were beginners. And if scales just kind of meant exams, then maybe that's their meaning for us, and we have a certain dread through the association with the scary bit of the exams. But in fact, scales are extremely useful. They're nice to play, they go up, they come down. They're very agreeable sort of patterns. And they are nice to play, but they are so useful. And in fact, when you think about most of the basic repertoire, the tonal repertoire, right back from the beginning of clarinet history, 1700-ish, up to the present day, most of the tonal repertoire, pieces are just based on scales. Let's just have a look at one or two. A couple of studies. These are from my more graded studies. There's a little one, very simple, by Closet, a slightly more complicated one by Demnitz. The simple one by Closet is in G major, mostly G major patterns, and the Demnitz is G minor. That first pattern, although it's rhythmically quite fun and interesting, is just a G minor melodic scale. Here's some slightly more advanced pieces. We've got some Mozart, we've got some Weber there. All scales, just glance down those pages, they're all scales. Here we've got some patterns from more modern, one more modern piece and one older piece. Lefebvre sonatas, wonderful pieces, I love the Lefebvre sonatas. That's the first page of the first sonata. So many scale patterns, dominant sevenths, arpeggio patterns, scale patterns, and then the first page of the lovely Paul Reed Victorian Kitchen Garden. If you know your scales, if you know your arpeggios particularly, there's nothing else in that page. It's just all scales and arpeggios, mostly arpeggios. Here's two movements of the Saint-Saëns sonata. All scales, well, lots of arpeggios as well. If you know your scales, you know your arpeggios, chromatics, well, you can really get round most of that. Another couple of modern pieces, the Mio Duo Contretemps. Just look down that page, so many scale and arpeggio patterns. The second page of the first movement of the Malcolm Arnold Sonatina. Scales and arpeggios again. That's what we have, and just I think two more examples, a bit of the Brahms first sonata, a bit of the Tartini Jacob. Just if we know our arpeggios, we can play these pieces, or at least it helps enormously. So scales are of course going to improve all aspects of our finger technique, and by learning scales in all keys, which I think is very useful to do, and a lot of fun to do if you really get into it and you find that scale practice is part of your daily work, all aspects of finger technique will be improved. They'll improve your ability to move around the instrument, particularly if you practice your arpeggios, dominant sevenths, diminished sevenths patterns. You can feel that you can really go anywhere very, very straightforwardly. Of course, it's going to, as a result, speed up the learning of these new pieces, because so much of the technical work in pieces, so much of it, are based on various different kinds of scale patterns. It's also going to vastly improve your sight reading ability if you recognise scale patterns from notation, which is why it's very important, by the way, to practice your scales from notation as well as from memory. When you see a scale pattern in sight reading, immediately you see it, you understand it, your brain can process it, and you're able to look on and see what comes next. It's going to develop your sense of key, playing in a key, very important, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in this short talk. And of course, if you are doing exams, you get more marks at exams. If you go to an exam knowing your scales, and you know whether you know them or not, you're going to get lots of marks. So a lot of reasons for actually indulging quite a bit of our practice time and our basic time in playing scales. So let's talk a little bit now about how we approach scales in our practice. And I hope you don't mind, but I'd like just to chat about a couple of publications that I've done to help us improve our scales. I've done these two books are for the more elementary end, and I've got something else coming up a bit later for the more advanced end. So, Improve Your Scales, I've done in two books. These books, the actual keys that I've introduced here are pretty much related to ABRSM exams. But the idea here really is that there is a process. And the idea about this process is that it's fun. Everything we learn, in a sense, can be fun. I mean, why not, really, if you think about it? If you would approach it in a particular way, you can make it fun to do. And that's what I've tried to do in Improve Your Skills. What I've tried to do, and it's rather based in the simultaneous learning kind of ethos, a sequence of related activities that end up by doing the thing. So in this case, it's playing the scale. But we don't play the scale until we've done an awful lot of other things first that really build up a complete picture, knowledge, ability to play that scale in a knowing way. So here are the pages. This is what each stage, as it were, each key looks like. So F major from grade 1. So it begins with some finger fitness exercises where we are basically going to think about which fingers we're moving, and if there are certain potentially weak fingers, like the little finger at the beginning of F major scale, as you can see in that first exercise, it practices by giving it some exercise. The thumb in the second exercise, an arpeggio exercise. Then there are a couple of studies, a scale study and an arpeggio study, which again go on to reinforce the particular scale patterns. And then finally, not quite finally, next a key piece, a fun piece, which I have taken obviously most of the patterns in the scale, but use them in interesting and fun ways. And that gives us an idea that, here is the scale of F, here's a piece in F major, and it uses those patterns. And then a section I call Have a Go, where we compose or improvise using the notes of the scale, of the key, to really kind of suggest in our minds, this is what it feels like living in this particular key. And then finally, just a little plan of action leading up to playing the scale, which I'll talk about in a minute. Let's have a slightly closer look at what's happening on these pages. So, F major, finger fitness. It tells me play the finger fitness exercises both tongued and slurred. I don't think I meant at the same time, but maybe you can vary it a bit. In these exercises, move your fingers precisely and with energy and not too far from the instrument. So lots of useful things there to be thinking about in building a strong technique. So let me give you number 1. Number 2, I'm going to do slurred. So number 1 explores the bottom of the instrument, the little finger especially. Number 2, the top, and a bit of work on the thumb there. There's another one that goes between the registers. And number 4 is a little arpeggio exercise. So then we have 2 studies, a scale study and an arpeggio study for each key. We're still in F major here. I've somehow found a title that uses the letter of the key as the title, as the first letter of the words in the title. So the scale study, First and Fruity, and it's got lots of dynamics in it. And of course it's just to give you the idea that most pieces are indeed based on scale patterns. This one is entirely so, of course, that's the idea of it. and then the arpeggio one is called Festive Fanfare, and does in fact have a part for the teacher or an alternative player that makes it into a little duet. I won't do it with a duet part, but here's Festive Fanfare. That was in 4/4, this one is in 3/4, so lots of opportunity for variety. And then the final piece is called a key piece, and in this case it's Ferocious Frog. And so it takes, obviously, scale patterns, arpeggio patterns, gives you a little bit more interest in terms of dynamics and rhythms. So it's a piece to give you a sense of key. It moves out of the key at one point, not with any accidentals, but you'll see what I mean. But it gives you a firm sense of F major, so you kind of think about it, think about what it is to be in a key, to play in a key. Have a go, which is this little idea of improvising in the key to give us, more sense of that key. Compose or improvise a short piece using the notes of F major, beginning with these notes. I always give a little entree into it. Try to finish on an F, F major, and that will obviously be the way. So this is what I'm given. So I'm going to have to improvise something, so maybe I'll improvise this. And I want to use the same kind of pattern. But there's so many different ideas that you could bring to it, and it's just fascinating to think about it. And then the last bit, you are now ready to say the notes up and down. And if we're teaching or we are really trying to learn these scales, I think that's a good idea. We say the notes either internally or out loud, up and down. We hear the scale in arpeggio internally. Maybe we play the first note, the key note, just to get that pitch exactly right. We kind of think about the finger patterns as we're hearing it in our head, and then finally we play the scale and arpeggio with confidence. So we've gone through a really quite a nice sequence of activities which have built up playing the scale, which is the last thing that we do. And hopefully by that time we are thinking in the key, we know the fingerings, we've got strong technical control of the particular fingerings of that particular key, and we do indeed play it with confidence. So just a few thoughts about the Improve Your Scales, the next stage up, grade 4 to 5, but of course you don't have to be literally grade 4 to 5 to be using it. It takes another collection of scales with slightly more sophisticated key signatures. And the book is laid out very much as in the first book. We just get new scales. I would like to just draw attention to this, that at the top, and this starts right back in book 1, you do get the opportunity to write down the actual notes. You do get the opportunity to write the key signature, and this is something that I know because I've seen people use this book. Often people just don't bother with this, but I think it's a very good idea actually, for a number of reasons. It connects your brain to the actual names of the notes. I know we're kind of thinking about it, but if you actually write the notes down, the actual names of the notes down, and you then actually write the notes down in notation, it strengthens, it imprints those note names more strongly on your brain, and the connections you make have been more powerfully set up. And of course, it is important to understand, that the key signatures. It's important to understand how the tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, the actual structure of a scale relates to those notes. The more ways that you know something, obviously, the stronger that understanding becomes. So I do suggest, fill that out. It only takes a few moments, and it's a good exercise. We get a little scale study in the same way. We get a little arpeggio study, and I've just recorded this one, so let's have just a quick listen to Blizzard. And there's usually a rather witty little key piece. Don't be flat, be natural. And you can see that I actually use that title to create the piece itself. And the stage ends, as they all do, with a bit of composing or improvising. And that last really important bit, where you just prepare the performance in your mind. And you may think, well, no, do I really need to do that? And of course the answer is you don't really need to do it. But by doing it, again, you're just strengthening the brain's connection with a sort of complete whole understanding of this scale, this key, and it really does make a difference. Because not only will you play the scale and the arpeggio with confidence, but you begin to know that scale, just like you know that you know certain things in life, and it makes it very much more useful as a learning tool. You may have come across this. It's one of my latest publications, and I wrote this mostly during all the lockdown, and it's a very comprehensive look at clarinet technique, really. So of course there's quite a lot about scales. There's quite a big scale section in it, and I just very quickly like to take you through it. It really delves deeply, a deep dive, as they like to say today, into scale playing, and really all the aspects of technique required in order to get the best out of scales and really help you to develop a very advanced and precise, relaxed, good finger technique. And so there's all sorts of ideas in the text, lots of scales written out in all sorts of different interesting ways. And for example, play a scale starting on any note of that scale. I've done the G major scale beginning and ending on A here, and you may know Malcolm Arnold's Sonatina, which often has this scale of G major but starting and ending on A, so that's a good reason for using that particular one there. But lots of other bits of advice, your finger pressure, for example. Think about your finger pressure when you're pressing down a key or a ring or just on an open hole. There's a lot of different ways of playing scales, obviously different kinds of articulation, different dynamics, different rhythms. There's one line, there's a whole another line of these things. So there really are massive ways of playing scales in different ways, which will always keep your imagination then in focus and enjoying them. Then we get into every key, and I go through every key, and I've written a number of exercises around the interesting aspects of each key. So here's A minor, and there are, how many there are here? Five different exercises related to the key and the arpeggio. And there are boxes, as you can see, around particular finger movements that require special work. And what I really want you to do here is just take those two notes, really think about the position of the fingers, the movement of the fingers, until they can be played really evenly, easily, no tension in the finger movement. And then always add the third note, the one before. That's such an important thing to do, and then you've really sorted it. And there's also one or two little comments where necessary, where I've just kind of given ideas on general technical aspects to bear in mind when playing these exercises. And I say there's one in every single key. For example, here's the one in D flat major with some particular comments about finger position. So there we are. Some thoughts on scales. Really useful patterns. They really are very useful patterns, and I'd like you to feel I really want to do some work on scales today. Maybe you practice the scale and the related patterns of the piece or the pieces that you're working at, or look at modulations and find what keys those pieces go into, so you can practice those scales and those related patterns as well. I hope you will enjoy your scale practice, and see how much it can really play a part in helping you to play your repertoire with more ease, with more control, with more satisfaction. I'm very happy to say that Faber have done a special, given a special code to get 20% off both the clarinet and the Improve Your Scales books. So if you go to this particular address, and with that particular code, you will get that particular discount until, well, almost the 20th of December, almost Christmas time, almost 20th of December. So thank you very much indeed for listening to this short talk today. I love the fact that in the Netherlands, scales are called tune ladders. Isn't that nice? And they don't have this word, but there's nothing wrong with scales. It's the associations that we have in our minds. So thank you for listening, and I do hope you enjoy your scales.